Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Invin and today I want to bring you guys a video on the best weapons for all sorts of different situations in New World. So during the open beta what I did is tested out a lot of different weapons, barring obviously the sword and the shield and the life staff, because they're basically the only options you've got for tanking or for healing. What I did do is work out along with my company members what the best combinations were for both PvE, PvP and on large and small scale for both of those, as well as just generally which weapons saw you through most of the game's content without having to switch it up. Now there's a few different things that I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to start off by going over PvP, then I'm going to go over PvE, and then I'm going to move into the overall section of the game, kind of things that see you through all the way, and I'm going to go over a couple of my favourite setups towards the end of the video as well. Now obviously this isn't conclusive, because what I would say is that pretty much all of the weapons in the game are actually viable at the moment. Amazon Game Studio has done an excellent job of balancing the weapons. A lot of people do think the Great Axe is quite overpowered, and I would say that it's a very powerful weapon, but it's just very popular, which is what is making it kind of like the meta. But there is a lot of other good options that also do just as well. I think it's because of the movement with the Great Axe as well that really makes it excel, but we are going to touch on that as we come towards it as well, so I'll cover that in there too. So firstly, starting off here with PvP, like I said there, so for DPS, there's some really good combinations. Personally, the two that have shined out to me as a 1v1 experience are the Hatchet and the Great Axe combo, and the Rapier and the Fire Staff. Both of these combos have a lot of maneuverability. They have a really good amount of dot damage, which means damage over time. If you're using the Hatchet and the Great Axe, you've got a huge amount of self-sustain, and you can make it so that the Great Axe also has some lifesteal elements on critical hits as well, which is a really nice thing, particularly if you're in that 1v1 or 1v2 situation. It works really well. The Fire Staff, you're able to use the movement ability, which is called Burnout, and this is able to travel through enemies, which does a ton of damage and also can reposition you nicely to a different point to avoid abilities too. And with the Rapier there, you also get a flush through ability that does damage when you go through the enemies too, making it a really good combo to be able to do a lot of damage as you're actually traveling through those opponents. Now I also really like the Spear and Bow combination for 1v1 and small scale combat, even 1v3, 1v4 where you're slightly outnumbered. This combo does really well, because the bow allows you to have a lot of movement ability, also allows you to get a bit of range in there too, right? But the Spear then also has that CC lockdown for when people do try to challenge you up close, and then you can actually lock them down, get a lot of damage in, move back with the bow, heal up as you need to, and this works really well. In terms of stat priorities, with the Hatchet and Great Axe, you go full strength with a little bit of constitution. Usually I do 3-1. With the Fire Staff and the Rapier, I just went full intelligence, because obviously you could do really a little bit of constitution, but to max out the damage on that one, because you are going to be a little bit squishier anyway. With the Hatchet and Great Axe, you could maybe get away with medium or heavy armor if you wanted to, depending whether you want that dodge roll, whereas when you use the Rapier Fire Staff, you're really going to want to be on that light armor just for that maneuverability. So generally I stay away from constitution, just stick full damage, but by all means do 3-1 on that as well if you would like a little bit more health. When it comes down to the bow and the spear, I just do full dex, again with light armor to give myself the most maneuverability, and this worked exceptionally well for pretty much all types of PvP, but certainly small scale. Now when we looked at large scale PvP, unfortunately I didn't get a chance to compete in a war this time around, but because I've competed in about 12 or 15 wars over the previews and the closed beta, I've been able to determine what the changes to the weapons have been and see which ones will still work well, and as well as that we did do some 5v5, 10v10 sort of stuff. The Fire Staff still works really well with that AoE, particularly when you upgrade the burn so that the extra dots do more damage. Really good weapon, and does a wonder in wars still, as a lot of my friends have told me from playing the game, which is always really good. On top of that, the Ice Gauntlet really shines through in big scale PvP because of its ability to crowd control a lot of people at once with the Ice Arena, and you've also got the Pylon there, which does a little bit of DPS even when you're not hitting people, which is absolutely fantastic. Now another weapon, again, the Rapier shines through in large scale because you're able to maneuver around, single out the backline people, so your mages and your healers, and you're really able to target them down before they've even got a chance to react sometimes. So that's a really good weapon if you are going to be on that flanking team in the wars, or if you're going to be sort of trying to outplay people in open world PvP as well. Surprisingly, the bow actually did really well if you took the Poison Cloud ability and volley of arrows, because you're able to have essentially a small scale AoE with the Poison Cloud there and a large scale AoE with that volley of arrows, and it did a lot lot of damage very quickly and was able to single out targets as well as that with the single target DPS. And pairing this with the spear worked well for single target, but pairing it with basically whatever else you want to get yourself some movement ability really did help there. Like I said there, for me personally, I found the spear to be the most useful, but the hatchet or the great axe works well too. The hatchet and great axe is decent in large scale PvP, particularly again if you're going to be soloing out certain players, the backline, the healers, the bows, the muskets, maybe even the magicians, but obviously what you've got to remember is you haven't got much AoE with that class, so it is mainly going to be singling out targets rather than doing AoE damage, so personally for me that one was better for small scale. Now moving on to PvE content here then, the hatchet and great axe build for me was by far one of the absolute best builds because the sustain from the hatchet when you level up berserk, so the first level you get that increase to damage, the second level where you upgrade the passive to it gives you a speed buff, and the third one gives you a heal, then you get removing debuffs and so on and so forth, and essentially once you get to the heal, which is the third upgrade in the berserk tree that you can get, so only 3 mastery levels in, it gives you one of the most sustains in the game where you heal for 30% of your HP once every 4 seconds for 10%, so in total doing 30% over 12 seconds, which is a stupidly good amount of HP. Paired with food and paired with potions, this can keep you alive in a lot of battles that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to get sustained through. And on top of this, obviously you do a lot of damage quickly if you take things like Feral Rush and Ravenous Strikes. You're able to get 4, 5, 6 melee hits in the time that people can only get 1 or 2, which gives you a huge advantage in that PvE content against those mobs there, and does a real lot of damage in expeditions, which is fantastic and really nice. Now pairing this with the great axe, when you take things like gravity well, you can get 45 buff on that, which obviously gives you a bit of 45 for yourself and for your teammates, and also means that you've got the maneuverability, you've got the ability to pull them in with Reap if you take that one, and comboing those together, then pulling out the hatchet and doing a lot of DPS can be really, really good. Now obviously, like I said, beginning there, if you spec this with 3 strength to every 1 constitution point, which is the way I would go with this, you then get a ton of damage purely off the great axe as well, and if you take the buff that when there's 3 or more enemies in the vicinity of you, you do 10% extra damage. This shines through excellently in expeditions. You're able to demolish enemies, particularly in boss fights where they spawn minions, as every so often you'll start doing just a little bit extra damage because they've spawned them, which is really, really good, particularly for the first boss in Amrine Temple where the adds are continuously spawning, so you'll be able to have that damage buff up pretty much all of the time, so it's really, really nice. Now another thing that worked really, really well was of course the fire staff. Now I paired this with both the ice gauntlet and the rapier and found both of these to equally do well, but the ice gauntlet was nice for the end tomb because that did give me the chance to get the mana back when I really needed to, which was quite often, to be honest, when I was using 2 magical weapons. But the fire staff's AoE is pretty much unbeatable. It's so good for just tearing down a group of targets, particularly when you're doing things like elite zones or corrupted portals. It's super helpful, and of course expeditions, it's really unbeatable. If you're pairing that with something like flamethrower as well, you're going to be doing so much AoE damage and single target burst damage. It's going to really make it shine through in terms of all of the PvE content there. So that's really something that I enjoyed using, and obviously the ice gauntlet did bits as well. I wasn't quite as good as I was expecting it to be. I think the fire staff is still slightly better just because the AoE does a little bit more damage, but having the ability to have that pylon down does do a ton of damage and can pull aggro away if your tank does go down. If you stop attacking for a second, the pylon will pull aggro, which might give you time to res the tank or pop some potions, and that really helps out in a lot of situations. So to be honest, it is up there, and it's a very good nimble weapon to get your hands on to have a nice bit of utility. The bow and the musket are both good in PvE if you can hit your shots with them, but I would say they're less versatile than the staff and the ice gauntlet because you're obviously not really getting much AoE with them. You can get volley of arrows, like I said there, with the bow, but the musket really is single target damage for the most part, in which case I would probably prefer the fire staff or indeed going for one of the melee weapons over that for DPS in PvE content, but it is still viable. It is still a very good weapon, and if it's the build you're going to be using for all content, then I would strongly recommend sticking to it because it does do a lot of damage, particularly in those boss fight scenarios where you're going to be singling out a target or 2. Now, what I want to move on to next is going to be the tank and the healer roles. Obviously, I've talked a lot about the DPS in both of those sections, but I'm actually going to speak first about the tank. So, obviously, sword and board, sword and shield, however you want to say it, that is the setup that you're going to be having as your main weapon. Now, secondary to this, obviously, we've seen the paladin build. That works well still. That does work even with the changes to the healing. Obviously, it's not quite as efficient as it once was, but it does still work very, very nicely. And actually, the sword and shield and life staff is one of the most tanky builds in the game still, particularly when you've got that heavy armor on, so I would highly recommend doing this. One thing to note is when you do run sword and shield, even if you put light armor on, you still fall into the medium category with the changes to the weight distributions, so you may as well just simply go for medium or heavy depending on what you want to spec into there, but generally tanks are going to go for that heavy armor. Now, other weapons that spec well with the tank are obviously the Great Axe. If you do go for a little bit of strength there, it's going to be super useful because that does scale solely off strength. Another fantastic weapon that I think a lot of people really overlook, even in the DPS category, is actually the Warhammer. I use this a lot and it's a fantastic weapon for stun locking, for knocking people back, for giving yourself buffs against enemies, and obviously weakening enemies there if you take that Sunderstrike 1-2, and it's a really, really good effective weapon that people are overlooking in my opinion, so I would definitely recommend that as an option too, and that again scales solely off strength, so works super well with the tank build. If you are looking to get a little bit of range and a bit of sustain when you're not using the sword and the shield, I would recommend the hatchet, putting 1 point into the aimed throw on the throwing tree of the hatchet, and then the rest of them to whatever else that you would like, definitely taking the berserk with the upgraded heal there, and that really does help you get a little bit of extra sustain, and taking the berserk with the movement speed upgrade will help you get from place to place when you are tanking as well, because obviously that's a big movement speed buff. Even if you're in heavy armor, 20% faster running for 12 seconds is super, super useful. In terms of healers then, what would I recommend for healers? Well, there's a few options now. Obviously, you need to be in light armor really to get the most efficacy out of your healing, which means that you're going to have access to that dodge roll, and obviously right now we don't see any other weapons scaling off focus, unfortunately, so you will need to take advantage of those amber gems. When you do that, things like the Great Axe become a very good and versatile weapon, because obviously you have the maneuverability there, you have access to things like gravity well, which gives yourself and allies 45 bonuses when you level it up, and also stops mobs getting to you if they are getting a little bit close, which is nice, can give you tank time to regain aggro, particularly early on. Or you can run something like the hatchet, again for the same reasons that I mentioned with the tank there, for simply the sustain, the extra speed buff when you are running from place to place with the upgraded berserk, and of course the heal there. But this does require you to have the axe out for the whole time, which healers are generally not going to have as much, but for utility and running it works well. Another good option is to have something like the fire staff. Again, you can have burnout there, which is the movement ability, or indeed the rapier with its flurry movement ability there, so you can go through people, enemies, or indeed just traverse across the map. Basically, it's entirely up to you with the life staff, as long as you get something with a socket that can have the amber gem on to convert some damage from focus. That's probably your best bet. The ones that we've seen work the best were the Great Axe and the hatchet, but by all means try out things like the Warhammer. I've seen that work very, very well as well for obviously stun locking, particularly in PvP environments. When people rush towards you, you can stun them, by which point hopefully a DPS or a tank has rotated to help you out, or indeed some casters from the back line have turned to DPS the target that's attacking you, and then you might be able to kill them because you've managed to stun lock them, or at least stop them for a couple of seconds from killing you quite as quickly, which gives you time to heal yourself, etc. And that does work really well. So maybe for wars you want something like the Warhammer. For general content I would recommend the hatchet or the Great Axe. Now, overall, obviously, a lot of you will probably hate me saying this, but the best build I have found by far is the Great Axe and the Hatchet. I know some people say the Great Axe is easy. Personally, I think the Great Axe is just a very good weapon. There is a lot of other good options, but just with the Hatchet and it scaling off solely strength, meaning that you can just do most of your attribute points into that strength attribute, and you will shine through with that. It's a really, really good combination. It's seen me through all of the content in the game. I've been able to solo the main story quests 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels above where I am because of the heal, because of the utility that I have with that setup. So for me, 3 points into strength, 1 point into constitution for every 4 points that you get works super, super well. It's going to give you a decent proportion of HP, so you're not going to get one shot. It's going to give you good survivability, and it's going to give you great damage, particularly single target damage. So really, really recommend it. My second favorite one for overall content would be obviously the sword and shield and the life staff together. It still works super, super well and is really effective at giving you a good amount of sustain, a good amount of protections, and actually you still do a decent amount of damage, enough to take you through the content, particularly when you grouped up with people. But even solo, this does really, really well. And there should be definitely be an honourable mention to the fire staff and rapier, as this works super, super well in all forms of content throughout New World. It was a ton of fun to play more than anything else as well, and give you a ton of options for maneuverability, for utility, for pure damage, and both scale off intelligence. So again, I would go either full intelligence or 3 to 1 again on the intelligence there. And if you're going to take life staff staff and sword and shield, you pretty much want to go 50-50 or 75% constitution, couple of points in focus, couple of points in strength. Basically, however you want to build that up, whichever weapon you want to be more efficient, but definitely constitution overall, so you get that tanking ability too. So hopefully you guys have found this video useful. That is my review of overall the weapons in the game, the ones that work for the most content. Obviously, there's things that I haven't mentioned as much, like the musket and the bow and the spear, which all work really, really well. But like I said there, for small-scale PvP or for small-scale PvE, they are better. Overall, generally, for bigger-scale stuff, not quite as good, but some people will be able to find uses for them and will be able to do well with them. So it's not a clear-cut guide. It's just kind of my experience, what I've found with the weapons, how they've kind of been tuned up for the open beta, and obviously hoping we don't see too many drastic changes going into release. This should still stand. So hopefully you guys have found this useful. If you have, please do leave a like on today's videos. It really does help me out. If you are new to the channel and you'd like to see more New World content, then please do drop a subscribe down below with the notification bells on. We've got tons and tons of great content coming up with lots of really relevant information just before launch, so make sure you don't miss out on any of that. If you would like to join my Discord community, the link for that can be found in the description and in the comments. We have currently got open applications for our company in New World. Although we are receiving quite a lot of these, we're going to get through them as soon as we possibly can and get back to as many people as possible. So if you would like to join that, that is the best place to go for that. Other than that, if you would like to join the channel as a member, you can click on the join button just underneath today's video. That will tell you the options we have available there. And other than that, as always, thank you very much for watching. Take care and peace.